Hello everyone, welcome to Earth Archives. We all know that in war, the two opposing sides will fight to the death, but the brilliance of human nature will always emerge, and there are many such examples in World War II. Today let's talk about the story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler. Please subscribe to the show before it starts, and share it with your friends if possible. On the morning of December 20, 1943, high above the North Sea, an American B-17 bomber named Ye Olde Pub soared at an altitude of 20,000 feet, its engines humming steadily as it became part of a massive bomber stream 8 miles long, en route to northern Germany. The mission? A strike on a Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen. At the helm of Ye Olde Pub was Charlie Brown, a young pilot who was about to lead his crew into one of the most harrowing flights of their lives. It was Charlie's first time piloting a flying fortress, and the lives of 10 young men from the 379th Bombardment Group rested in his hands. The mission was precarious from the outset. As they crossed the German border just after 11 a.m., the crew scanned the skies for enemy fighters. They were aware that if they could see Germany, Germany could see them. As they entered the enemy's radar range, the first puffs of black smoke erupted from the German flak cannons. Explosions rocked the bomber, sending shockwaves through the aircraft. The nose of the plane was sheared off, and ice-cold winds blasted through the cockpit. The temperature outside plummeted to 60 degrees Celsius, while shells continued to rain down, striking engine after engine. Despite the damage, Charlie fought to maintain control of Ye Olde Pub, struggling against the relentless onslaught. The mission wasn't over yet. With 2 of their 4 engines dead, Ye Olde Pub began its long journey back to the North Sea. But the sky held more dangers. Enemy fighters, Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s, emerged from the clouds, closing in on the damaged bomber. Charlie, thinking fast, turned into the attackers, narrowing his profile and buying precious seconds for his crew to fight back. Gunfire erupted from the bomber's remaining operational guns, taking down one of the 190s, but the fight was far from over. As the tail gunner's weapon failed and the aircraft was riddled with bullets, the crew's situation grew dire. The plane was a shell of its former self, the frost from the open holes in the fuselage freezing the crew's guns and rendering their communication useless. Charlie's oxygen tank was punctured, and the bomber began to spiral out of control. Dazed, gasping for air, Charlie struggled to regain control, fighting against the icy winds and the battered plane's failed systems. Just when it seemed that Ye Olde Pub might be lost, Charlie snapped to attention. As the plane plummeted toward the city of Oldenburg, he fought the controls with every ounce of strength he had left. At just 3,000 feet, the plane leveled out, skimming so close to the rooftops that it tore shingles from houses below. The bomber had made it. Barely. With most of the crew either wounded or unconscious, Charlie had done the impossible. He had brought his broken flying fortress back from the brink of certain destruction, an act of sheer will and courage that would go down in history as one of the most miraculous feats of survival in World War II. The Ye Olde Pub limps along, its remaining engine barely holding together, flying at a measly 135 miles per hour as it makes its way toward England. Every second feels like an eternity, and as they approach the Atlantic Wall, Germany's heavily fortified coastline, Charlie Brown knows that if they don't make it through this last stretch, they won't make it home at all. The wall, defended by the best anti-aircraft gunners in the world, stands between them and survival. Charlie's crew, battered and bloodied, has no illusions about what lies ahead. With their bomber barely holding together, he makes it clear, anyone who wants to bail out can do so. A prisoner of war, though grim, would be better than being blown out of the sky. But, in a moment of rare unity and bravery, none of the men take him up on the offer. Eyes fixed on the northern horizon, they pass the Jever airfield, unaware that German fighter ace Franz Stigler is about to take off in pursuit of yet another B-17. Stigler, fresh off a victory the day before, has already shot down 2 bombers and is closing in on Ye Olde Pub for his next kill. The Knight's Cross is within reach, a prestigious award for an ace who proves his mettle. But Franz's reasons for flying into combat are far from bloodlust. He's seen firsthand the destruction caused by Allied bombers, cities like Hamburg and Bremen reduced to rubble. He fights not out of hatred, but out of duty, a duty to protect his country and survive in a world on the brink of collapse. Franz had learned his trade in the harsh deserts of Libya, flying alongside the legendary Hans-Joachim Marseille. He had lost a brother to the war, witnessed the fall of the Afrika Korps, and fought in the brutal battle for Sicily. Now, as he gears up for another kill, the opportunity to shoot down Ye Olde Pub seems like another step toward his coveted Knight's Cross. But as he lines up for the kill, something halts him. His finger, poised on the trigger, freezes. He stares, perplexed. The bomber in his sights is in shambles, its fuselage riddled with damage, its guns destroyed, and only the ball turret beneath still able to move, though its guns can't even reach him. The sight of this crippled plane, struggling to stay airborne, stirs something in Franz. His mission is to defend his country, but shooting down a plane filled with helpless men, whose bombs likely just killed his own countrymen, feels hollow. Franz moves in closer, flying alongside the battered bomber, taking in the full extent of its damage. He could easily take it down with a few shots, but there's no glory in that. He pulls up alongside the cockpit and makes eye contact with Charlie. Without a word, Franz waves at him and points downward, signaling that they should land. He knows the bomber doesn't stand a chance against the Atlantic Wall. Charlie, oblivious to the gesture, keeps his eyes fixed on the horizon, focused on the deadly RR guns ahead. But as Franz stays close, it becomes clear, unless he intervenes, they will never make it out. Franz makes a decision. He stays with the bomber, flying alongside it as it crosses over the Atlantic Wall. The German anti-aircraft spotters on the ground, trained to recognize friendly aircraft, will surely see Franz's unmistakable Messerschmitt, and they will know that this is no ordinary bombing run. As the Ye Olde Pub flies across the RR guns, not a single shot is fired. The enemy gunners, perhaps confused or unwilling to target one of their own, stay silent. Charlie is unaware of what Franz has done to spare them. Only when Franz salutes and banks away, heading back toward German lines, does Charlie's realization hit him. The German ace, the same man who had every right to shoot him down, had made a choice to save his life. Charlie, still fighting to keep the crippled bomber in the air, watches as Franz disappears into the clouds. The moment is fleeting, but the impact lasts a lifetime. A man who could have been their enemy, a man who could have been their executioner, chose instead to help them survive. And so, as Ye Olde Pub limps its way across the North Sea, Charlie Brown and his crew fly home, alive, thanks to the mercy of a man they would have called their enemy. A moment of humanity, in the midst of war. The Ye Olde Pub was a battered B-17 flying fortress that had somehow made its way back to England, a miraculous sight as it limped across the skies, its body riddled with bullets and its engines sputtering. It was a small miracle that the plane even managed to land, but there it was, its landing gear scraping the tarmac with a groan that echoed across the base. The crew, though exhausted and dazed, had done it. They had survived. The commanding officer, standing by the runway, was already preparing to award medals for their extraordinary service, for having defied the odds, for having made it back from the jaws of death. But before the ceremony could even begin, the higher-ups at High Command got wind of the story, and their reaction was not one of pride or celebration. They were furious. This mission, this miracle of survival, was not to be spoken of. It was not to be shared with the world. The details of what had happened, the heroics and the sacrifice, would remain a secret. The mission, in their eyes, never happened. And just like that, everything was swept under the rug. The crew members were ordered to remain silent, their bravery and their struggles to be erased from history as if they had never taken place. Far from England, near the coast of Bremen, Franz Stigler, a German fighter pilot, found himself on the ground, having completed his mission. His own heart was heavy with the weight of what he had just done. He had flown out there to intercept the American bomber, just another mission in the vast theater of war. But when he had been face to face with the B-17, he had seen something that changed everything. The bomber was barely holding together, its tail half shot away, its engine smoking. The crew inside was fighting for their lives, struggling to keep the aircraft in the air. But instead of opening fire, Franz had made an extraordinary decision. He had escorted the crippled bomber out of enemy territory, ensuring that it made its way back to safety. But Franz could never tell anyone what had happened. If his superiors ever found out, it could mean a court-martial, or worse. He could be executed for failing in his duty, for letting the enemy slip through his fingers. The act was one of mercy, of humanity, but in the eyes of the war machine, it was treason. And Sir Franz carried the secret with him, the memory of his actions hidden deep inside, locked away in the vaults of his mind. The story would fade into the mists of time, obscured by the darkness of the war that had torn the world apart. But history has a way of resurfacing, of finding a way to be told. In 1985, 50 years after the first flight of the B-17, Boeing invited veterans to the anniversary celebration, a gathering of old fighters and heroes, to mark the milestone of a plane that had carried so many through the skies during the war. By this time, Franz had long since moved to Vancouver, Canada, a place far removed from the scars of war. He was a quiet man, living a peaceful life, and when the invitation came, he was hesitant at first. He was the only German pilot there, and he had no idea what kind of reception he would receive. But he went, and there, at the gathering, he was interviewed by a local TV station. The interviewer had no idea who he was talking to. Franz was just another face in the crowd. But when Franz told his story, the world began to listen. The story of the German pilot who had spared the lives of the enemy, who has shown mercy in a time of unrelenting brutality, was too powerful to ignore. At the same time, Charlie, one of the American crew members from the ye olde pub, was searching for answers. The story of the German pilot who had saved their lives had haunted him for years, and he couldn't rest until he knew who that man was. So, in 1985, Charlie wrote letters, first to Adolf Galland, the famous German flying ace, and then to the German magazine Jägerblatt, trying to piece together the identity of the mystery pilot. For years, the letters went unanswered, and the search seemed futile. But then, in 1990, after years of letters, phone calls, and a tireless pursuit of the truth, Charlie and Franz finally found each other. The two men, one American and one German, met in person, their paths crossing after decades of silence. The story of their connection, of the unlikely bond between a bomber crew and a German fighter pilot, stunned the world. It was a testament to the power of compassion and humanity, even in the darkest of times. But not everyone understood. Even years after the war, after the story had been told and retold, Franz continued to face hatred and disdain. He would receive calls from Germany, where people called him a traitor, condemning him for not following the rules of war. In Canada, some of his neighbors looked at him with suspicion, their minds clouded by the horrors of the Nazi regime. They didn't know the man Franz had become, the man who had defied the orders of war to show mercy to strangers. They didn't know the weight of the decisions he had made, the cost of the silence he had carried for so long. Franz would respond calmly, always with the same answer: they would never understand. And perhaps they never would. But for those who did understand, for those who listened to the story of the German pilot who had saved the lives of his enemies, Franz Stigler became something more than just a soldier. He became a symbol of the possibility of redemption, of the idea that even in the heart of war, there was still room for kindness, for mercy, and for peace.